The sun hung low over the endless plains of the Wyoming Territory in the summer of 1887, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold as it dipped toward the horizon. The double-bar ranch stretched out like a kingdom unto itself, miles of golden grass waving under the breeze, dotted with grazing cattle and bordered by weathered wooden fences that had stood against blizzards and bandits alike. Elias Thorne, the rancher who'd built this empire with his own calloused hands, sat astride his loyal bay horse, Thunder, watching the world he knew so well. At 42, Elias was a man forged by the Wild West, tall and broad-shouldered, his face etched with lines from years under the relentless sun, a salt-and-pepper beard framing a jaw that rarely softened into a smile. He wore his battered Stetson low over piercing grey eyes, a yellow bandana loose around his neck, and chaps over denim that had seen more dust than water. He'd buried a wife young, lost partners to rustlers, and fought off claim jumpers with a Colt that hung heavy on his hip. Words were a luxury he rarely afforded. Action spoke louder on the frontier. That evening, as he rode the fence line checking for breaks, he spotted something that stopped him cold, an unfamiliar figure out by the old corner post, moving in ways that didn't belong on a working ranch. She was young, maybe 25, with long dark hair cascading down her back, dressed in a white tank top and cut-off denim shorts that hugged her athletic frame, utterly out of place amid the rough attire of cowboys. Her name was Isabella Reyes, though Elias didn't know it yet, a city girl from back east, a dancer fleeing the stifling theaters of New York for the wild freedom she'd read about in dime novels. She'd arrived on the stagecoach 2 days prior, answering an ad for a cook and helper at the ranch. But her real dream was to find space to practice her ballet and gymnastics, disciplines that had made her a star on stage but left her craving the open air. The ranch hands had snickered at her modern clothes and graceful poise, calling her the ballerina behind her back, but the foreman had hired her anyway. The ranch needed hands, and she cooked a mean stew. Elias had been away on a cattle drive and returned to find this stranger turning his world upside down. As he approached, Isabella was stretching against the tall fence post, one leg extended high in a perfect split, her foot resting effortlessly on the top rail as she balanced with the grace of a bird in flight. The wind whipped her hair, and sweat glistened on her skin from the day's heat. She didn't hear him at first, lost in her routine, pushing her body to its limits to stay sharp. When Thunder snorted, she glanced over, startled but not embarrassed, lowering her legs slowly and standing tall. "Evening," she called out with a bright smile, her voice carrying a faint eastern accent. Elias tipped his hat but said nothing, his eyes narrowing as he dismounted. He wasn't one for newcomers, especially ones who looked like they belonged in a saloon show rather than mending fences. Yet something about her confidence held him there. Isabella, undeterred by his silence, wiped her brow and gestured to the post. "This fence is perfect for practice. Back in the city we use bars, but out here, the wood's rough, but it works. Watch this." She hoisted herself up again, gripping the post and lifting into a full vertical split, one leg straight up, the other down, her body forming a flawless line against the sunset. It was mesmerizing, a display of strength and flexibility that no ranch hand could match. Elias stood frozen, his horse grazing nearby, as he watched her hold the pose effortlessly. She glanced down at him, cheeks flushed from exertion, and asked playfully, "Like this?" Her tone was teasing, inviting approval, perhaps even flirtation in the innocence of the moment. Elias didn't answer. He just stared, his rugged face impassive, the weight of a lifetime of solitude pressing on him. Women on the ranch were rare, and none like this, vibrant, unafraid, challenging the harshness of the land with her softness. Minutes passed in silence as she held the pose, waiting for some reaction, but he gave none. Finally, she lowered herself gracefully, landing lightly on the grass, her breathing steady. "Tough crowd," she laughed lightly, brushing dirt from her shorts. Still, Elias said nothing. The unthinkable stirred in him then, a pull he'd long buried. Without a word, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His strong hands reached out, one gently but firmly grasping her waist, the other supporting her raised leg as she instinctively lifted it again. He didn't ask. He simply guided her back into the split against the post, his touch steady and sure, adjusting her form with the quiet expertise of a man who'd handled wild horses and unbroken colts. Isabella's eyes widened in surprise, her heart racing at the unexpected contact, the warmth of his calloused palms against her skin. He held her there, longer than necessary, his grey eyes locking onto hers for the first time, a flicker of something raw or unspoken passing between them. The rancher, who spoke so little, had answered not with words, but with an act that shattered the walls he'd built around his heart. As the sun finally slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the plains, Isabella felt the spark of something wild beginning, a connection forged in silence, strength, and the vast loneliness of the West. Elias released her slowly, stepping back, but the air between them crackled with promise. She smiled, bolder now, and he nodded once, the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. Thunder whinnied in the distance as if sensing the shift. That night, around the campfire with the hands telling tall tales, Isabella caught Elias watching her from across the flames, his silence louder than any confession. The ranch would never be the same. The days that followed on the double-bar ranch blurred into a rhythm of dust and desire, the vast Wyoming plains witnessing a silent courtship between the stoic rancher and the spirited dancer from the east. Elias Thorne woke before dawn each morning, as he always had, tending to the herd with the same unyielding focus that had carved his life from the unforgiving land. But now his thoughts drifted to Isabella Reyes, the woman whose graceful movements had invaded his solitary world like a summer storm. She threw herself into ranch work with surprising vigor, rising early to prepare breakfast for the hands, fluffy biscuits and strong coffee that earned her grudging respect from the cowboys who had initially dismissed her as a fragile ornament. By midday, she'd mend tack in the barn or help with branding, her lithe arms proving stronger than they looked, though she often stole moments to practice her routines, using barn beams or corral rails as her impromptu bar. Elias watched her from afar at first, his grey eyes tracing the elegant lines of her splits and leaps, a quiet admiration building in his chest. One afternoon, under a sky heavy with the promise of rain, he found her by the creek that bordered the ranch, her feet bare in the cool water as she balanced on a flat rock, extending one leg high in a standing split, her reflection rippling below like a mirage. "Like this?" she called out again, echoing their first encounter, her voice laced with challenge and invitation. Elias, leading Thunder to drink, paused, his hat shadowing the faint smile that tugged at his lips. He didn't answer with words. Words had never been his ally. But instead he tied his horse and waded into the shallow stream, the water soaking his boots as he approached. With a gentleness that belied his rough exterior, he placed his hands on her hips, steadying her as she held the pose, his touch sending a shiver through her despite the warm air. Isabella's breath caught, her dark eyes meeting his, searching for the stories hidden behind his silence. In that moment, the unthinkable deepened. He leaned in, his beard brushing her cheek, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that tasted of sagebrush and unspoken longing. She melted into it, her arms wrapping around his neck as the split dissolved into an embrace, the creek babbling around them like applause. From then on, their connection grew in stolen glances and shared silences, Elias teaching her to ride the range, his strong arms guiding her onto Thunder's back, showing her how to spot strays in the distance, Isabella drawing him out with tales of glittering stages and crowded cities, her laughter filling the empty spaces in his heart. But the Wild West was no fairy tale, and trouble brewed on the horizon. Word spread of rustlers hitting nearby spreads, bold outlaws led by a notorious figure known as Black Jack Harlan, a former Confederate with a grudge against land barons like Elias. One night, as thunder rolled across the plains, the rustlers struck the double bar, driving off a dozen head under cover of darkness. Elias rallied the hands, Isabella insisting on joining the pursuit despite his protests. "I'm no wilting flower," she declared, strapping on a borrowed gun belt, her dancer's poise now laced with frontier grit. They rode out at first light, tracking the thieves through canyons etched by ancient rivers, the group tense and alert. Elias led, his Colt drawn, but when they cornered the rustlers in a narrow pass, chaos erupted, gunfire echoing off the rocks, horses rearing in panic. Isabella, separated in the fray, found herself face to face with Black Jack himself, his scarred face sneering as he leveled his revolver. Time slowed. Drawing on her agility, she dodged his shot with a fluid twist, leaping onto a boulder and kicking the gun from his hand in a move born of years on stage. Elias arrived just in time, tackling the outlaw and binding him with rawhide, his eyes wide with fear and pride as he pulled. Isabella close. "You could have been killed," he growled, his voice rough but tender, the first full sentence she'd heard from him in days. She smiled through the adrenaline, touching his face. "But I wasn't. Like this," she whispered, mimicking a defensive stance. He chuckled then, a deep rumble that shook them both, and in the aftermath, as the sheriff hauled away the gang, Elias knew his solitary days were over. Back at the ranch, under a starlit sky, he took her hand by the same fence post where it all began. "Marry me," he said simply, no fanfare. Just the truth of a man who'd found his match. Isabella's eyes sparkled. "Like this?" she teased, pulling him into a kiss that sealed their future. They built a life together, Elias softening with her light, Isabella grounding her dreams in the soil of the West. The ranch prospered, their story becoming legend among the hands, a tale of how silence spoke volumes and the unthinkable became inevitable. Years later, their children would hear whispers of that first encounter, the dancer and the rancher, bound by a question unanswered in words but fulfilled in deeds. And so, in the endless expanse of the Wyoming territory, love conquered the wild, proving that even the hardest hearts could bend like grass in the wind. If you loved this thrilling tale from the Wild West archives, hit that subscribe button now. Dive into more epic stories of cowboys, outlaws, and unbreakable bonds. Don't miss out on the adventure. Subscribe today and join the Frontier family.